Shalom, shalom, guys. It's your boy Yara Yahu Yasharal. Today I want to give you a recommended reading list. Why am I doing this? Well, it's very simple. You've heard it said that you are what you eat. I want to change that and say you are what you consume, meaning you are what you read. Whatever you read is going to come out of you. Whatever knowledge you pick up from these books will be the same knowledge you use to process the world around you. That lack of actual understanding about how things are will limit how you interpret things around you. So it's important that you gain as much input so that you can get the correct output when you're trying to process things. Now, we tell all the time to people that reading is fundamental. We tell people all the time that knowledge is power. We tell people all the time that there's so much in a book that you can learn. But we never recommend what books to read. We just say read. So people go out and they grab these urban fiction books about how old little mama got, she got a swag bag and now she getting, done up by some Jamaican dude or whatever. Just these ridiculous books, or young gangster thug and his journey through the inner city streets, which that's real. It's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But when you consume the same thing over and over and over and over, you're gonna be obese. Obesity is a state of failure. Okay, it's not a state of just being large or accumulating a lot. It's an actual state of failure from what you consume. And that applies to your mind as well. Whatever you put into your mind, make sure that you have both a variety and a nutritious value to everything you're putting into you. Otherwise, you're just eating empty calories. You're just reading empty words, and you're wasting your time, and you're not increasing in anything. You're just becoming obese on information and not actually getting any knowledge. Or knowledge is nutrition. You need that. So I'm gonna give you a recommended reading list. I'm gonna go over a couple of different things. I have some history here. I have some biography here. I have some fiction for you fiction fans, and I have some philosophy, sociology, science type books as well that I think are very, very interesting that you'll like. I'm gonna start off with this book here. Okay, this is Before the Mayflower. Alright, I don't know if I hope that it's going to be flipped around to where you can see it. I'm hoping so. But anyway, this is Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr. Okay, a history of Black America. Now, it's not just Black America. You have to understand that Black America is America. There is no difference between America and Black America. We helped build this country. It was built on our backs. It was built with our labor, but it was also built with our ideas and sociological and ideological innovations, as well as histories. Without a true understanding of that history, you'll see America as a very different place, a very Eurocentric place, a very British place, and I don't understand your place in that history other than you were slaves. Okay? Now that's a very small part of what our history here has been, but it's the part that we're constantly reiterated about. Not just us, but all people in this land are told about the slavery of the so-called African American, not the actual participation in the history of this young nation. So it's very important. If you don't read anything else what I tell you today, please, please, please go read this book, Before the Mayflower by Lerone Bennett Jr. Very, very, very influential. Okay, one of my favorite books. Thucydides, the history of the Peloponnesian War. And you don't have to read this one particularly, but read something very much like this. What this is a history of Greek culture about 400 years before the birth of Christ. The reason I say this is important is because you have to understand that Western civilization particularly is a derivative of Greek culture. It's a derivative of Greek and Roman cultures. Western society is built on top of fallen societies before it. So a lot of what you do and a lot of what you hold dear and what you've been taught and how you're taught and what ideas you're taught are based on what was important to Greeks and Romans almost 2,000 years ago, with very slight change or variation. Okay, so it's important you know why things are the way they are. You need to know why is Greek letters still used in colleges today? Why is Latin still taught today, even though it's not a spoken language other than outside of the Vatican? Why is these Black Greeks, or as they call themselves, why is that something you should take pride in, or is it something you should shy away from, or what does it mean to be a Greek? Without something like, again, without the history of these people, you're getting a very one-sided view of what you're trying to interpret. So another one of my favorites, this is my current read right now. All right, this is Africa and Africans in the Making of the Atlantic World, 1400 to 1800 by John Thornton. This is my current read at the moment. I'm loving this book because this represents a time in history that we don't talk about much, especially in America. And that's what happened before we became slaves here. What was happening in Africa? What was happening around the world? How were Africans a part of the world global structure? You have to understand that the globalization of the world didn't start when computers got here. The world has been globalized for a very long time. You can go into the Bible and you can see that they were traveling thousands and thousands of miles by ship, by land, and if you believe some reports, even by air. But that's going to be, I'm going to leave that up to you, okay, if you want to believe that. But this book is very, very important. They call a lot of this time, some of this time, the 1400s specifically, the Dark Ages. That's a Eurocentric view. It was a lack of planning inside of Europe, a lack of innovation inside of Europe, and that's why they call it the Dark Ages. That was not worldwide. That was specific to that particular land, those particular people, and their particular history. But again, in America, you get a Eurocentric timeline. And understand, I'm not saying white, I'm saying Eurocentric, meaning that European history has been supplanted in your mind as the only line of history. You hear my kids in the background. But that's not the only line of history. You have to understand that history is everywhere, happening at all the time, to all people, not just one people who happen to write the book that you can read. Okay? So check out this book. Very, very cool book. Now, because I've heard so much about, especially as I become Hebrew, or not become Hebrew, but understood who I was in history, and understood the bloodline that I belong to and the nation that I come from, and understanding that that is from the ancient Hebrew people who dwelled in ancient Samaria and land south of that, okay? Which is still Africa, so I'm not denying that I'm African, just you have to get a different point of view if you understand, if you want to understand where I'm coming from, and that's going to come from some of these books I'm telling you about, okay? This book is Islam's Black Slaves, The Other Black Diaspora by Ronald Siegel. He's also the author of The Black Diaspora. I've been told so many times that Islam is the black man's religion, that Islam is the religion of the black man, that you have to get into Islam, brother, because that Bible stuff, that was all forced on you, and you never had a choice. But before you came here, you was Islamic and you prayed to this person and you did such and such practices. Okay, let me show you this. Islam's Black Slaves. You understand what I'm saying to you? You were slaves in Islam too. This is not a purely Christian thing. It's not a purely American thing. It's not even a purely non-African thing to enslave black people or so-called black people that look like you. I hope you can see this picture here. Okay? So understand. Know something for yourself. When anybody tells you something, you go and you research it yourself and you find out whether or not it's true. Then you make a decision. Don't just accept anything at face value. Test everything, because that's what's going to get you over. And that's what's going to bring you out of whatever situation you're in and keep you from being fooled and tricked by everyone around you. Okay? Islam's Black Slaves. Check this one out. This is next on my reading list. If you've already read this, please leave a comment. Let me know what you thought about the book. This next one is for all my Hidden Colors fans. I'm a fan too. I like it. I don't agree with everything, but I definitely like a lot of what they have to say. This is Black First, 2,000 Years of Extraordinary Achievement by Jesse Carney Smith. She's the author of Epic Lives and the winner of Women's National Book Association Award. Very cool book here. Black Verse, Jesse Carney Smith. So all those things you just heard of for the first time in Hidden Colors, they read them somewhere, guys. It's not like they're just doing this research for the first time ever. That's a compilation of research done over years and years that's not popular and that's not presented to anyone other than those who are interested. And that's a problem with our education system. It's not a well-rounded education system. It isn't an education system that caters to the global knowledge. Again, it's a Eurocentric based knowledge taught from a Eurocentric standpoint of staying on top of other cultures and dictating the knowledge around the world. If you don't believe me, go and check the World Health Organization. You'll see that that's Eurocentric. The World Education System is Eurocentric. This is all put out by the UN. The World Dietary recommendations are, again, Eurocentric. Different people need different things depending on where you live and how you live and the makeup of your body. Everyone doesn't need the exact same thing. You're all very unique. So while we need very similar things, everything isn't universal. And that's something that needs to be realized. I'm going to move on to biographies. You might know this man. That's right, Huey Newton. This is Huey, Spirit of a Panther by David Hilliard. It's also with Keith and Kent Zimmerman. There's a foreword by Frederica Newton. I haven't read this one. Again, this is on my list. I just picked this one up not too long ago. I think I paid $2? See what I'm saying? It don't cost a lot to get your knowledge. It don't cost a lot to take yourself out of the hole that you've been put in your whole life. Okay? It costs very little. That's a lot less than dime sack and swishers. That's gonna cost you about what, $12, depending on what type of swishers you get. So you can either get a pack of swishers and a dime and keep your head up for a day, or you can get this $2 and change the way you think about life and change your head for the rest of your life. So that's really up to you. Okay, I'm really super excited about reading this book. I've seen the movies. I've seen just about every Huey Newton documentary you can see. I've watched all the Facebook on YouTube on you can imagine, but I have yet to read a lot specifically about his life. I've read about the Black Panthers in general, but not specifically about Huey and his background. So I'm super excited about reading this book. Again, if you've read it, let me know how it went. Probably by far next to Lady Sings the Blues, the autobiography of Billie Holiday, this book here. And this book is hard to find. You need to find this book. This is Assata Shakur. Okay? If you've never seen this, not Angela Davis. Don't think every black woman with a afro is Angela Davis. This is Assata Shakur. Okay? And this is her autobiography, meaning she wrote this. She approved this. And this was before she went to Cuba. Okay? A lot of you might only heard her name because Jay-Z and Beyonce went to Cuba and they visited her and it caused a big stir. You see, this is a well-worn edition because I've come through this a number of times. This is an excellent book. If you want to see again what the Panthers were about, what the Black Liberation Army was about, the BLA, what kind of things were going down in America, this is what you need to read. This will show you 70s and early 80s in America in a way that you'll never get from a textbook, in a way that you'll never get from a Eurocentric newscast or history program, because they're not interested in preserving or promoting anything positive about these people. This woman is called a criminal. This woman is a wanted felon from New Jersey. I think she has a $2 million warrant on her head, which is why she's in Cuba. She's in exile. She also is called a cop murderer and all sorts of things that aren't true, but you won't know that until you hear her story. She was railroaded in trial. She had 6 counts against her, all of which were ruled mistrials except for the last count, which was obviously also a mistrial, but there was a definite agenda to lock this woman up because of what she had to say and what she was capable of. So if you don't read anything else, again, read this book. Know your people, know what America is capable of, know your struggle. If you think keeping a pregnant woman underneath the prison with rats on no bed with wet floors is constitutional or fair, then maybe this isn't for you. But if you disagree with that, you should read more about what happens in Mississauga here. Alright? Now this brother here is wild. Randall Robinson. This book is called Quitting America, The Departure of a Black Man from His Native Land. I read this book about 3 years ago. This is by far one of the best books I've ever written in my life, or ever read in my life. I love this book. One, because Randall Robinson has such a command of the English language. If you think Shakespeare is the all-time height of English writing, you don't know your people and you don't know the poetic essence that flows through your blood. This man's writing is like reading any psalm I've ever read. Okay? But not only is it intriguing, it's truth. And it's blatant and it's raw and it's ugly. It's not vulgar, but it's very, very raw. And you're gonna get some different ideas and you're gonna be challenged about what you believe and what you think is true and what you think is right when you read this book, Quitting America. Next one is A Year of Living Biblically. One Man's Humble Quest to Follow the Bible as Literally as Possible by A.J. Jacobs, also the author of The Know-It-All. I love this book, personally as a Torah keeper, because this person Mr. Jacobs tried to follow Torah fully in every single law. Now he's an atheist for the most part, but he decided, I'm going to do this and see how hard this is, what's the truth behind it. So it comes off really funny. It's a really funny book at times. It's a really truthful book at times, and it's a really, really it's an interesting social experiment. So you should definitely try this out, especially you Torah keepers. See what it looks like. If you're following the type of things that he did, and he actually had a couple of sources. He was both a Christian pastor, a Jewish rabbi, a Catholic priest, Hasidic Jews. He used a bunch of different references to get interpretation of each of the laws so that he could follow it as closely as possible, and did it for an entire year. Okay? So you can see the transformation just on the back. And you probably recognize that from a lot of your Facebook friends. When we used to look like this, now we look a lot more like this. Okay? But that's A Year of Living Biblically. So check this. This is The Book of the Hopi by Frank Waters. This is actually a Hopi historical and religious worldview of life. Now, I'm putting this one in here because people don't really understand Native Americans at all. And nothing at all. You don't understand who they are. You don't understand what they've done. You don't understand the kind of things they were subjected to. And the next book I'm going to show you about that is about that too. This is a really good book. It's really strange because a lot of the Hopi prophecies really match up with Christian prophecies. Well, I'm going to say Christian, biblical prophecies. Some of the stuff that's in Isaiah and Jeremiah is the same stuff that's this Hopi shaman, or their spiritual leaders, what have you. Very, very similar. Okay, so that's a very interesting book as well. Staying on that same note, Black Elk Speaks, the life story of Black Elk, who was a Sioux. For those of us in Nebraska, you know some Sioux most likely. You know some other derivatives of the Sioux. And this is Crazy Horse. This is Crazy Horse's nephew, actually. But he was a spiritual leader in the Sioux Nation. I love this book as well. Again, the prophecies and the visions that he has of heaven, or what they call the other world, basically, very, very similar to what we see in biblical times. Very, very similar to what we see out of biblical truths. So check this book out again. And you're going to see the battle with Custer. He was there. You're going to see the occupation of Midwest America by the colonial, well, not the colonials, but early American, pushing westward, occupying lands, killing children. You're going to see children stabbed and killed by U.S. soldiers. You're going to see treaties gone back on. You're going to see natives forced to march in the winter from their hunting grounds into scarce lands with no food. You're going to see them given polio blankets and killed purposefully. You're going to see them betrayed on every note. And you're going to see what it looks like when one people, no matter what their color, takes away the rights and treats another people like they're nothing from this own word of mouth. Check this book out. Just to lighten up for a second, Well, I'm not a very light dude, but these are some fiction books, okay? One of my favorite, I just stumbled upon this year. I didn't know anything about it. Langston Hughes, Not Without Laughter. It's more of a historical fiction. It follows the life of this young man here, growing up in sharecropping USA. So this is still Jim Crow, sharecropping. We don't have any rights, but this is his life. So this is just like a lot of us who grow up in the so-called hood or the so-called ghetto or so-called underdeveloped urban areas, whatever nonsense they want to call it. We don't know that something's different. We don't know that there's a different life until we step out of it and we see something different for the first time. But those experiences you have as a child shape you tremendously and shape everything about you. When you're reading fiction, you have to understand that no matter what the book is, if it's fiction or nonfiction, there is always a message, there is always a theme, and there is always something that the author is trying to convey to you about whatever it is they're passionate about. They wrote that book for a reason. That's why I don't like the new urban fictions, because there often is no message, or the message is very, very surface and shallow. There's no human reflection. There's no point for growth. And you've just wasted hours of your life reading about how little mama went to the club and shook it up, and she was sleeping with this dude and she was sleeping with that dude, but she's still fly and she's still bossy and she independent. I hate that. It's bull. Okay? Read a book that's actually going to teach you something and help you grow as a person. Not Without Laughter, Langston Hughes is one of those type of books. It's still funny. It's still got drama. You know, his sister becomes a prostitute and his mama is working for, works 5 miles down the road, and her husband is no good, and it's crazy. I'm not going to give you the whole story. It's a good book. Read it. Black Boy is kind of in that similar lane. It's by Richard Wright. If you've never read Richard Wright is one of the most prolific black writers I have ever read. Let me take that back. He's one of the most prolific writers I've ever read, white or black. And I've read everything. Hemingway, I've read Shakespeare, I've read everything. I've read everything you can imagine. Okay, so still one of my favorite writers, because he's so colloquial that you seem like it's like your uncle is telling you a story. Okay, now this takes place in 1920s to 1940s, roughly, America, inner city. I want to say Chicago or New York. I can't remember. It's been a while since I read it. I want to say New York. I want to say Harlem specifically. So you're going to be able to see New York in the 1930s, but not from the industrialist point of view and the Rockefeller point of view and the swinging 20s and 30s point of view, but from what it looked like to live in Harlem. What it looked like to have heroin addiction. Y'all realize crack in the 80s had nothing on heroin in the 30s. Yes, it ran through just like that, just like it did then. You had strung out addicts on heroin, just like you had strung out addicts on crack today. But you won't know that unless you read your history. Again, this is more of a biography. I say it's a fiction. Some of it is fiction, but most of it is his biography, and it's actually based on his life. So this right here, it's amazing. It's amazing. Read this book. Fun book here, just a step away from the norm here. This is the Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Let me see if I'm reading this right. Yeah, Screwtape Letters by C.S. Lewis. Fiction. Maybe. I don't really know. I read it. It's kind of scary, y'all. I ain't gonna lie. It's basically a demon talking to his demon general about how to get a man into hell. Yes. So they strategize and they plan and they do all types of things to make sure he gets into hell from the beginning of his birth to his death. Very, very good book. It could be fiction, but it seems absolutely true. And you can see some of this stuff at work in your life right now. So very, very good book. I definitely recommend this book. It's awesome. Here is Alice Walker, The Third Life of Grange Copeland. Yeah, I read without my glasses off. I'm not blind. I need it helps. All right. Alice Walker, The Third Life of Grange Copeland. I love Alice Walker. If you've never read Alice Walker, again, you're missing out on the gem so much better than stuff that's been put out today. Again, this is about sharecropping USA. You're going to see again, the problems that have been facing us in Black America today are not new problems. The drinking, the fathers leaving, the single mothers, the incessant whoring, the incessant prostitution, the incessant lack of responsibility, the inability to move ahead educationally or financially. It ain't new. We are doing the same things we have been doing. It may look a little different now, and our oppressors may not be singularly white like they were before, but we are in the same position. Again, unless you read a little bit of history and understand that, you won't get it. This isn't a history book, it's a fiction book. Again, this is for you people that like drama and you like crazy stuff. There's a scene in this book where the wife pulls a gun on the father because he was out late night drinking and cheating, and she said, "If you ever come in my house like that again, I'll blow your head off." So there's drama in this book. It's a great book, and you also get to see father, son, grandfather, and the progression of that son until he becomes the grandfather, and you'll see the life happening. So it's a great book. Very well written. Great character development. Last section here, I'm going to get out of here. I've told a couple people about this book before. I'm glad I get to show you now. We're getting into philosophy and thought and all these sorts of things here. The real Ebonics debate. This is edited by Teresa Perry and Lisa Delpit. The Power, Language, and the Education of African American Children. Guys, I talk about this all the time. Ebonics are, like I call it, Black American English is a legitimate dialect of English that if you're unable to speak, you will be unable to communicate with a vast number of people. Not all black people speak Ebonics or Black American English, just like all English-speaking people don't speak American English. And you can go and speak American English in Britain or in India and be misunderstood because it is not the same dialect. Just like there's Mandarin Chinese and there's Cantonese Chinese, and both of them we call Chinese, but they are very dissimilar and you would not understand one from the other. There are a number of Black Americans who speak Black American English and do not speak American English proper. Okay? But that does not mean that they cannot communicate. It is our failure to communicate to them, or your failure to communicate to them, that is going to keep the separation there. And until we learn, Malcolm X knew this. You speak to the people in their own language. You cannot try to speak to people in another language, or else you cause a division. Most of the time, you cause a situation where you're creating an inferiority complex to the people you're trying to help. Understand that. So, read this book. It goes through what happened in Oakland when they tried putting Ebonics into the Oakland school system. They saw test scores rise. They saw graduation rates rise. They were in full plan to move it, to make it standard. And it was met with opposition, and it was met with hate, and it was met with all type of nonsense. They removed it, and you can look at Oakland today, and you will see that the test scores have continued to fall. The national graduation rate, according to the last figures I read in 2013, for black males, the national graduation rate is 53%. 53% of black males graduate from high school in this country. In the city that I'm in, Omaha, Nebraska, that number is 37%. That means 37%, 3 out of 10 black males go to high school, if they make it that far, and don't graduate. Now that's ridiculous. In a nation that talks about education, in a country that talks about innovation and moving forward, if you cannot educate at the very base level of a high school education, you are failing your citizens and you should be answering for it. Whatever you have to do to educate your people, then you need to do it. And if you fail to do that, then you are guilty of letting those people fail. So don't complain to me about food stamps. Don't complain to me about public assistance. Don't complain to me about people who can't go out and make a living when you fail to educate a system inside of a system that you make mandatory. Okay, let's make that perfectly clear. Next book, Creative Conflict on African American Thought. This is a great book because it's by Wilson Jeremiah Moses. It's gonna go over some of the thoughts of popular black philosophers such as Frederick Douglass, Alexander Cromwell, Booker T. Washington, W.E. Du Bois, and my all-time favorite, Marcus Garvey. It's gonna compare and conflict those different viewpoints and give the positives and negatives and put them up against each other. So we're talking about reasoning here. We're talking about what solution works best. Everyone finds different heroes in these gentlemen here, and every one of these gentlemen has very differing views. So this is a very good book to see the different viewpoints they have play up against each other in a real world logic experiment. So this is a really good book. GOD Experiments. This is by Gary E. Schwartz, PhD. Also with William L. Simon. It says How Science is Discovering God in Everything, Including Us. I love when people say you can't scientifically prove God because it's absolutely not true. Absolutely not true. Scientific process says to prove something as true, you have to be able to duplicate it, and many people have to be able to duplicate it to get the same results in order for it to be a scientific fact. That's why the theory of evolution is a theory, because it cannot be proven. Okay? This is a book that goes through several experiments to try to prove God. I'm talking about measuring the soul as it leaves the body. I'm talking about measuring ethereal presences. This is an awesome book. For you science buffs who are also faith buffs, read this book. Very, very good book. I recommend this to everybody. It's a textbook, and you don't have to get specifically this one, but get something on it. Critical Reasoning. This particular one is by Jerry Cedarblum and David W. Paulson. I got this book in college. It's about arguing. You people love to argue, but you don't know how to do it. It's not about winning an argument. It's about making a valid argument. Who cares if you talk louder or longer or with bigger words if you still don't have valid truths in your argument, or if you're committing argument fallacies, okay? Learn how to argue. Learn how to put your thoughts into ideas that can be transferred and that can actively be applied in your conversation. That's called communication, people. Do it. Learn it. Critical reasoning. You don't have to get this book, but find a book on critical reasoning, or find a book about arguing and fallacy, and find a book about communication. Communication is key. If we're going to do anything as people, we're going to have to learn how to communicate. And a failure to do that will be a failure of our people. So I've given you here maybe 20, 30 books that you can go and check out. Check out one. Just one. Any of them. Any of these books will lead you to the others. I've read all but maybe 3 of these books. Okay, that's not a brag point. I've got so many more books to read. I've got so much more knowledge to get. I've got so much more to learn so that I can interpret the world around me with a clearer 360 view. And you have the opportunity to do that. It's something you can do. It's something I wish you would do. These are some books you can read. We can talk about challenges all day. We can talk about all this stuff. But without knowledge, we perish. So take some time, invest into yourself, love yourself a little bit more so that you can love everybody else around you by educating yourself with the things that will help you interpret the world. It's your boy Yariyahu Yasharal, signing off. Y'all have a good one, man. Deuce.